At the turn of the 20th century, the travelling circus was probably the most exciting and popular form of public entertainment. The magnetic attraction of the big top was so strong that it gave rise to the expression running away with the circus. However, in the case of two albino African American brothers at that time, the circus ran away with them. During the height of circus popularity, determined bounty hunters scoured America's backwoods and the world, seeking out people they could transform into sideshow attractions. The showmen took out ads in newspapers and trade publications, appealing for freak hunters, as they were called. Then aged 6 and 9 years old, George and Willie Muse were the eldest of 5 children who lived with their mother Harriet Muse in the small community of Truevine on the outskirts of Roanoke, Virginia. Against virtually impossible odds, both boys were born with albinism, which rendered their skin extremely vulnerable to the harsh Virginia sun. In addition, both also bore a condition called nystagmus, which often occurs with albinism and weakens vision. The boys had started squinting in response to light from such a young age that, even as children, they had developed permanent furrows in their foreheads. Like most in the community, the Muses subsisted on a meagre living made from sharecropping tobacco. The boys worked hard helping out by patrolling the rows of tobacco plants, looking for pests and eliminating them before they could damage the precious crop. Although Harriet Muse took excellent care of her children, they led a hard life of manual toil amidst racial violence. At that time, lynch mobs often targeted black men, and the neighbourhood was constantly on the edge of another attack. Being black children with albinism, George and Willie lived at a heightened risk of scorn and abuse. It remains a mystery how the two boys came to the attention of a circus promoter called James Herman, or Candy, Shelton. It was possible that a desperately poor relative or neighbour sold him the information, or that Harriet Muse allowed their performances to take place temporarily, resulting in their prolonged captivity. According to author Beth Macy, the Muse brothers may have agreed to make a couple of appearances when Shelton's circus came through Truevine in 1914. However, the promoter possibly abducted them when his show left the area. The usual explanation in local legend was that the brothers were working in the fields one day in 1899 when Shelton lured them with offers of candy, then kidnapped them. When evening fell and her two boys were nowhere to be found, Harriet Muse guessed that something terrible had happened. Being then a major form of entertainment, circuses featured sideshows, so-called freak shows, and demonstrations of unusual skills like sword swallowing. The travelling extravaganzas would set up on roadsides all over the country. Candy Shelton was able to capitalise in an era when disabilities were regarded as curiosities, and African American people had few, if any, rights respected by whites. The young Muse brothers promised to be a potential gold mine, which Shelton marketed under the sideshow stage names of Eco and Ico. Until 1917, the two boys growing into men were displayed by managers Charles Eastman and Robert Stokes, appearing in carnivals and dime museums. They were advertised under often insulting names such as the Ethiopian Monkey Men and ambassadors from Mars. To create even more of a shock effect, they were often ordered to bite the heads off snakes or eat raw meat before the paying crowds. The brothers were bought and sold amongst a string of managers like chattels until, after several exchanges, they came again under the control of Candy Shelton. He promoted the young men as the missing link between humans and apes, claiming variously that they came from Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Mars, and descended from a tribe in the Pacific. Willie Muse was later to describe Shelton as a dirty, rotten scumbag who displayed a huge indifference towards the brothers on a personal level. The boys were not even allowed to go to school or learn to read. Shelton actually knew so little about them that when he handed the Muse brothers a banjo, saxophone and ukulele as photo props, he was shocked to realise that they could not only play all of the instruments, but that Willie was able to replicate any song after hearing it just once. The Muse brothers' musical talents brought them even more popularity, and in cities across the country their fame grew. Soon Shelton was to strike a deal with circus owner L.G. Barnes to install the brothers as a sideshow in an agreement that rendered the young men modern-day slaves hidden in plain sight. The way Barnes saw it was that he made the boys a paying proposition, whereby they could bring in as much as $32,000 a day, but were paid barely enough to survive on. Behind the curtain, the youth would be crying out for their family, only to be told to be quiet as their mother was deceased and there was no use even asking about her. In 1922, Shelton transferred the Muse brothers to the Ringling Brothers Circus, attracted by a more lucrative deal. He shaped their blonde hair into sculptural locks that emerged dramatically from the tops of their heads and dressed them in colourful, unusual garments, claiming the men had been found in the wreckage of a spaceship in the Mojave Desert. Meanwhile, Harriet Muse had exhausted every resource trying to locate her sons, but local prejudice was so rife that no law enforcement official took her seriously. Even the Humane Society of Virginia disregarded her pleas for help. She still had another son and 2 daughters to care for, and eventually moved into Roanoke for better pay as a maid. However, over those years, neither she nor her missing sons lost faith in their belief that they would be reunited. In 1927, when Harriet Muse heard that the circus was in town, she claimed to see in a dream that her sons were in Roanoke. On October 14th of that year, George and Willie Muse, now in their mid-30s, arrived back in their childhood township for the first time in 13 years. By that stage, the circus was a vast affair, with 4 locomotives, 100 rail cars, and employing 1,600 workers. Performances took place over 5 rings and 6 stages, featuring elephants and high-wire acts. As George and Willie Muse began playing the crowd pleaser "It's a Long Way to Tipperary," a popular song during World War I, George spotted a familiar face at the back of the audience. He turned to his brother Willie and said, "There's our dear old mother. Look, she is not dead." After 13 years of separation, the brothers dropped their instruments and joyously embraced their mother. Shelton soon caused a stir at his show's interruption and told Harriet that the brothers were his property. She insisted that she wasn't leaving without her sons, and to the police, who arrived soon after, explained that she'd allowed her sons to be taken for a few months on the condition that they were returned. Instead, they'd been held indefinitely, seemingly by Shelton. Fortunately, the police were sympathetic and agreed that the brothers were free to go. However, Candy Shelton was not to give up so easily. Ringling sued the Muse family, claiming that they had deprived the circus of 2 lucrative earners bound by legally binding contracts. Harriet Muse enlisted the help of a local lawyer and won a series of lawsuits which confirmed her son's right to back wages and visits home during the off-season. Standing her ground against white multimillionaires paid off, and in 1928 George and Willie Muse signed a new contract with Shelton which enshrined guarantees of their hard-won rights. The company allocated the brothers a fresh name, changed to Eco and Iko, sheep-headed cannibals from Ecuador. Despite the new attribution, to our ears quite repugnant, the brothers embarked on a world tour, beginning at Madison Square Garden and travelling internationally as far afield as Buckingham Palace. Although Shelton still operated as if he owned them and often stole from their wages, George and Willie Muse were able to send money home to their mother. Harriet Muse continued to fight for her son's rights and, with their help, bought a small farm and worked her way out of poverty. When she passed in 1942, the sale of her farm enabled the brothers to purchase a house in Roanoke where they spent their remaining years. Candy Shelton finally lost control of them in 1936 and ended up as a chicken farmer. The Muses continued to work under slightly improved conditions until they retired in the mid-1950s. In the comfort of their home, the brothers were well known for telling long stories of their harrowing misadventures. While George Muse passed in 1972, Willie carried on until 2001, achieving the age of 108. Their descendant, Erica Turner, is grateful for their family legacy and the fact that, in her words, the Muse brothers, no matter what, came out on top.